I've been thinking a lot lately about whether The Rings of Power will be cancelled at the end of its second season. Now, if you think about it, Disney's cancellation of The Acolyte ultimately goes to show that a lot of fan bases are increasingly unhappy with the current creative direction of their favourite franchises. The message has reached the law of diminishing returns. It can't be sustained, and the more expensive the series, the more costly the failure, obviously. This is not really comparable to something like Batwoman, which could be as woke as the day is long, but still managed to get to 3 seasons all the same, probably because it was a cheap CW series. It didn't have a big budget, it didn't cost much money to make. But The Acolyte, on the other hand, was an expensive show, and Disney had to cut their losses after 1 season. Now, if you look at The Rings of Power, it's also an expensive show. In fact, it's the most expensive TV series ever made. The second season's viewership is down considerably when compared to the first season. I've already discussed this Deadline article that says Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power saw steep audience decline for season 2 premiere, Samba TV says. According to data from Samba TV, 902,000 US households tuned in for the premiere episode within 4 days of its debut, which is down quite significantly from the first season. In fact, it's half the audience that the first episode of season 1 drew in less time. Samba TV says that within 3 days of viewing, 1.8 million US households had watched the first episode. Now, The Rings of Power is planned to have 5 seasons. 5. Can you handle that? 5 years of this show? But here's the thing. It's cost Amazon $1 billion to make this show. $250 million of that was just to purchase the rights. Lord of the Rings is not like Star Wars. Star Wars is an iconic, significant sci-fi pop culture phenomenon, but it is primarily a live-action entertainment franchise. Lord of the Rings is a highly acclaimed and revered literary work, a major contribution to culture and the arts. The Rings of Power is a new adaptation of the J.R.R. Tolkien book saga, and so when a writer is contributing to that world, adding to that mythology, in a way they're trying to emulate Tolkien to some degree, which I think is impossible. I mean, very few people would be able to write anything beyond something that seems like Lord of the Rings fan fiction. And I think what we're getting with The Rings of Power feels like really bad fan fiction. But when you're working in Tolkien's world, everything you do, everything you add to that, every creative decision you make, every character choice that you make, every reinterpretation of canon that you make, is going to be compared to his masterpiece. So a writer's creative shortcomings are therefore going to be exposed when put up against Tolkien's work. Tolkien's writing quality and his canon becomes the benchmark. So whatever a new writer writes, it's got to be a faithful addition and continuation of Tolkien's canon, of his world. That's not what we're getting with The Rings of Power. I think that's fair to say. That's putting it mildly. So considering the massive cultural impact of the original books, The Rings of Power's mediocrity and creative failure only becomes more amplified. It becomes a spectacular failure of epic proportions.
There is a tempest in me, and it will not be quelled by you, Regent.
By comparison, 1 or 2 bad Star Wars TV series, they don't do quite as much damage to the brand of Star Wars, because Lord of the Rings is considered a higher caliber of fantasy fiction. Everything you write, therefore, matters so much more. The Rings of Power has its audience. Clearly, it has its own fan base. But the ratings have declined dramatically because the show simply isn't as good as it should be for various reasons. And there are so many elements to this show that make its critical and indeed commercial failure so much worse, so much more noteworthy. Not just for the reasons I've already outlined here and in previous videos, but because of how expensive and enormous the show is. The longer this show goes on with subpar ratings, the worse the situation. If the show is cancelled or at minimum doesn't complete its 5-year run, maybe it does 1 or 2 more seasons, the show will be considered a huge failure. It's already become a meme of a TV series, with notable poor writing, dull characters, an unlikable protagonist, and various breaks from canon. And what studio wants to be remembered for, number 1, producing the biggest budget TV series of all time that was a creative and commercial failure, and number 2, the studio that produced a poor adaptation of an iconic literary work. But considering how much money has been spent on the show, I'm getting a kind of sunk cost fallacy vibe going on here. So given all the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent, the studio probably feels that they have to plow on with the series, right? They've gotten this far, so they just have to keep on pushing through. They have to keep going, regardless of how lukewarm audiences are on the show, regardless of the underwhelming reception that they're receiving. Now, having said that, I would not be surprised at all if there was an announcement in the coming weeks or months that the show was cancelled at the end of the 2nd season. But if I was a gambling man, which I'm not, I would say it will likely stumble through to a 3rd season. But the budget will likely have to be cut. Maybe even a reduction in the number of episodes from 8 down to something like 6. Something like that. At bare minimum, though, a budget cut looks inevitable to me. They have to reduce the spending here. They cannot justify spending so much money on such a poor ratings return. I cannot see any creative course correction or retooling of the series that would result in returning the ratings to season 1 levels. Even if there was an entirely new creative team brought in and the 3rd season was way better than the first 2, I think the damage is done. I think the Rings of Power brand isn't good. It's likely that the audience they had in the beginning of season 1 probably aren't going to come back. And that's the reason why I'm doubtful that the show will complete its 5-year run. Mind you, I could be proven wrong in a few years' time. Regardless, if the show isn't cancelled after this 2nd season, then a final 3rd season with a reduced budget would be my prediction. But what do you guys think? The Rings of Power, is it going to continue for a 3rd season? Is it going to continue for a 4th or 5th? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. Please share this video, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.